On October 23, 1944, a massive fleet of Japanese warships steamed toward the shores of Leyte Island in the Philippines. What they were about to do, there would be a catastrophic mistake, an attempt to stop the coming American invasion force that would end up being one of the largest naval battles in history, taking place over a vast area and involving hundreds of ships and thousands of aircraft. This was the Battle of Leyte Gulf. By late 1944, the Allies had driven the Japanese army out of much of the Pacific and were ready to take back the Philippines from the enemy, but doing so was no easy task. The islands were still defended by large numbers of Japanese troops, who were determined to fight to the death rather than surrender. And if the Allies could capture these islands, it would deal a death blow to Japan's war effort, cutting off their access to vital resources in the region and beyond. The United States in particular had a vested interest in retaking the Philippines. Not only were the islands strategically important, they also contained vast oil reserves that America needed to fuel its war machine. But it was American General Douglas MacArthur who had perhaps the most personal stake in the outcome of the campaign. When Japan invaded the Philippines shortly after the outbreak of the war in 1941, MacArthur had been forced to flee the islands with his battered and much reduced army. Now, more than 3 years later, he had finally regrouped and was ready to return. But he was determined not to make the same mistakes as last time. As part of his strategy to put Japan to the sword, he planned to launch 2 major offensives simultaneously, one in the south to capture the island of Mindanao and another to seize Leyte. These twin assaults would increase the pressure on the Japanese home islands and force them to stretch their already overextended supply lines even further. And personally, it would allow MacArthur to keep his promise to the people of the Philippines that he would be back. But before he could set foot on Philippine soil again, MacArthur had to ensure that the islands were ready for the arrival of his troops. To that end, he asked the U.S. Navy for help in weakening Japan's defenses and driving its forces away. The massive naval and aerial bombardment campaign that followed caught the Japanese completely by surprise. Flying back to the Philippines from his headquarters in Australia, MacArthur made a reconnaissance flight over Leyte Gulf on October 11th. What he saw below him left him stunned. Hundreds of Japanese planes and position after position of enemy troops littered the landscape. But it was the devastation wrought upon Japan's naval forces that impressed him the most. American aircraft from Admiral William Halsey's Task Force 38 had struck the Japanese fleet head-on and eliminated nearly 500 enemy planes. With Japanese air power neutralized, MacArthur realized he had a golden opportunity to retake the Philippines without firing a single shot. He cabled Admiral Thomas K. Hart, commander of the U.S. 7th Fleet, ordering him to stand down and hold all landing forces until further notice. But as fate would have it, this new development was not communicated to the front, and as a result, disaster nearly struck. On October 17th, Japanese Admiral Kurita, commander of the 2nd Fleet, decided to press on with the invasion regardless. His massive fleet of 53 warships steamed toward Leyte Gulf, unaware that the Americans had deployed large numbers of troops to the island. As soon as they were spotted, however, American forces opened fire, attacking the Japanese with everything they had. At first, it seemed like the Japanese would prevail. They smashed through the hastily assembled American defenses, allowing several of their transports to reach the beaches. But then something strange happened. Instead of unloading their troops and securing the landing sites, the Japanese ships turned around and headed back out to sea. It was a complete rout, and one that came as a shock to everyone involved. For their part, the Americans were stunned by the sudden withdrawal. They had prepared for a massive engagement, only to see the Japanese flee before them. Meanwhile, back at headquarters, MacArthur was furious when he heard what had happened. He immediately got to work trying to figure out why the Japanese had backed down. Could it be a trap? Had they simply decided to abandon the invasion, or worse, were they planning something even more sinister? To get to the bottom of the mystery, MacArthur ordered a group of B-24 Liberator bombers from the 58th Fighter Group to fly over the Japanese fleet and take some pictures. What they found was nothing short of incredible. All of the Japanese ships were still there, including their powerful battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. It was as if they had never been there at all. But that couldn't be right. MacArthur knew that the Japanese had attacked the island earlier that day, and he had seen the evidence with his own eyes. There were bombed-out planes and destroyed gun emplacements as far as the eye could see. So what was going on here? Suddenly, it dawned on MacArthur. The Japanese hadn't fled at all. They had been ordered to stand down, just like he had told Hart to do. Someone had gotten the message, and someone had passed it on to the front. But who? MacArthur didn't know, but he didn't need to find out. All that mattered was that the Japanese fleet was still there, sitting ducks in the middle of the ocean. He took this chance to strike a crippling blow against the enemy, ordering the liberators to attack the Japanese fleet with everything they had. At first, it seemed like the Japanese would prevail. Their anti-aircraft guns opened fire, ripping apart the American bombers and sending them crashing into the sea. But the Japanese had made one fatal mistake. They assumed that the Americans would eventually run out of ammunition and go home. But MacArthur had brought too many planes to the fight, and the Japanese soon found themselves under attack from all sides. One by one, their ships were crippled until finally the whole fleet was forced to retreat. The Americans were jubilant. They had won a great victory, and at relatively little cost. But MacArthur was far from satisfied. He wanted more. Despite suffering heavy losses, the Japanese still had plenty of ships left. In fact, their battleships and cruisers were practically undamaged. If he could just get them into the open ocean, he thought, his submarines and aircraft could finish the job once and for all. But how could he lure the Japanese out of their hidden coves? Then he had a brilliant idea. He would send a small detachment of ships to harass the enemy, while the rest of the fleet played defense. It was a risky move, but it just might work. And if it did, the Japanese would be in for a world of hurt. MacArthur ordered Admiral Thomas L. Sprague to take a small group of destroyers and go looking for a fight. Meanwhile, the rest of the fleet was to stay close to shore and protect the invasion force. As luck would have it, Sprague found exactly what he was looking for. Just off the coast of Samar Island, he spotted a Japanese convoy carrying troops and supplies to the front lines. Sprague immediately ordered his ships to open fire, but the Japanese were ready for him. Their anti-aircraft guns blazed away, forcing Sprague to break off the attack and retreat. As soon as he did, though, the Japanese changed course and headed straight for Leyte Gulf. There they hoped to find the rest of the American fleet and destroy it once and for all. But what they didn't know was that they were walking right into a trap. MacArthur had anticipated this move, and his men were waiting for them. The Japanese fleet steamed full speed ahead, eager to engage the enemy. But as they entered the strait, they found themselves under attack from three sides. Sprague's ships were there, of course, but they were joined by two other American task forces, those of Admirals Fitch and Hall. Together, they formed a near-perfect U-shape, funneling the Japanese into a narrow channel. And it was there that the real battle began. MacArthur's plan called for a massive broadside to be fired at the head of the column, followed by a deadly crossfire from the flanks. The Japanese ships would have nowhere to go, nowhere to hide, and nowhere to escape. It was a brilliant strategy, and it worked to perfection. One by one, the Japanese ships were blasted out of the water, until finally only a handful remained. And as if to make sure that none of the enemy ships would survive the ordeal, MacArthur ordered a pair of submarines to join the fray. The subs tore through the remaining Japanese vessels, sinking them one by one. The battle was over almost as soon as it began, and the Japanese had suffered a crushing defeat. Yet despite this, none of the American battleships or cruisers had been damaged. The American victory was complete. MacArthur had dealt a death blow to Japan's navy, and his troops could now land unopposed. But he knew that the war was far from over. The Japanese army was still a formidable fighting force, and they would continue to resist the Americans for many months to come. In fact, the Battle of Leyte Gulf would be the largest naval battle in history, involving hundreds of ships and thousands of aircraft over a vast area of the Pacific. It would be fought over a period of several days and result in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of soldiers and sailors. But in the end, it would be a decisive American victory. The Japanese Navy was broken, and the road ahead for the Allies was clear. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more historical tales. Thanks for watching.